In the grand halls of the Vatican, where moments of deep reflection and solemnity are common, a quiet but powerful event took place, one that no one expected, least of all Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle himself. As the cameras rolled discreetly, capturing the essence of the gathering, something unfolded that left those who later reviewed the footage completely astonished. Luis Antonio Tagle, a name known across the Catholic world for his humility, kindness, and dedication to the faith, was simply going about his day, unaware that a camera had been left recording. But what happened next? What did he do when he thought no one was watching? The answer would not only surprise the world, but also offer a rare glimpse into the true nature of a man revered by millions. Born in Manila, Philippines, Tagle has always been seen as a figure of grace and compassion. His rise within the Church has been marked by his ability to connect with people from all walks of life. But on this particular day, something different happened, something that would reaffirm his character in the most unexpected way. As the room cleared and officials left one by one, the camera continued to roll. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, just the usual quiet after a formal event. But then, in the stillness, Tagle did something unusual. He looked around, making sure he was alone. And then, instead of heading out like the others, he did something that would later make headlines. What he did next wasn't a grand speech or a bold declaration. It wasn't something done for show or applause. It was a simple act, one that revealed the depth of his character in a way no official title or position ever could. As the minutes passed, the camera captured a moment of profound humility. Luis Antonio Tagle, dressed in his cardinal robes, bent down and began picking up pieces of paper and trash that had been left scattered on the floor. A man of his stature, expected to be surrounded by assistants and attendants, was doing what many would consider menial work, all without hesitation, all without expecting recognition. But this wasn't just about cleaning up a room. It was a reflection of something deeper, something that those who knew him well had always seen in him, but the world rarely had the chance to witness firsthand. Tagle's actions echoed the teachings he had so often spoken about, his belief that leadership is about service, that true power comes from humility, and that the essence of faith is found in the smallest, quietest acts of kindness. As the camera continued to record, his actions took on an even deeper meaning. He didn't just clean up, he carefully placed each chair back in order, ensuring that everything was in its place. He adjusted microphones that had been left askew, making sure that everything was ready for the next gathering. It was the kind of work expected from staff, not a cardinal. But in that moment, Tagle wasn't concerned about expectations. He was simply being himself. But why did this simple act cause such a stir? Why did it shock so many people when the footage was finally seen? Because in a world where power is often associated with prestige, and leaders are expected to command rather than serve, here was a man proving that true leadership is something entirely different. Here was a man showing, not with words, but with actions, what it truly means to be a servant of the people. This was not the first time Tagle's humility had been evident, but this time the world had a chance to see it for themselves. When the footage surfaced, it spread like wildfire. People couldn't believe what they were seeing. In an era where high-ranking officials are often seen surrounded by luxury, protected by protocol, and distanced from everyday concerns, here was a man who chose humility over hierarchy. The video wasn't just about a cardinal picking up trash. It was about the kind of leader Luis Antonio Tagle had always been. Social media erupted with reactions. Many praised his down-to-earth nature, calling him a true example of what faith should look like in action. Others were left in shock not because they doubted his character, but because moments like these are so rare to witness. Even those who weren't religious found themselves admiring the man who, despite his position in the Catholic Church, remained grounded in the values of kindness and service. But for those who had followed Tagle's journey, this wasn't a surprise. From the very beginning, Tagle's life had been marked by simplicity. Born into a humble family in Manila, he grew up understanding the struggles of ordinary people. He wasn't raised in grandeur or privilege. Instead, he was taught the importance of compassion, generosity, and humility. These values never left him, even as he climbed the ranks within the church. As a priest, he was known for riding public transportation, sitting beside regular commuters rather than using private cars or escorts. He would often visit the poorest communities, not as a figure of authority, but as a friend and spiritual guide. His sermons weren't filled with complicated theology, but with stories that resonated with people's everyday experiences. He had a way of making even the most complex teachings of the church feel personal and relatable. It was this very approach that made him one of the most beloved bishops in the Philippines, and later one of the most respected cardinals in the Vatican. But this moment, captured on camera without his knowledge, felt different. It was proof that his humility wasn't just something he preached, it was who he truly was. As the video continued to circulate, more stories about Tagle began to emerge. People who had encountered him in the past came forward, sharing their own experiences. One man recalled how, during a typhoon relief mission, Tagle refused to sit in a reserved area for officials, and instead ate his meal with the volunteers, sitting on the floor like everyone else. Another shared how he had once seen Tagle quietly slip money into the hands of an elderly street vendor, making sure no one noticed. And then there was the story of a young seminarian who had struggled with doubts about his faith. He had approached Tagle for guidance, expecting a formal lecture, but instead the cardinal simply listened. For hours he sat with the young man, not interrupting, not offering immediate solutions, just listening. That simple act of patience and understanding, the seminarian later said, was what convinced him to stay in the church. These stories, once just personal experiences, now held new meaning in light of the viral video. It was as if the world was finally seeing the true essence of Luis Antonio Tagle, a man who didn't seek attention or recognition, but whose actions spoke louder than any sermon ever could. Even within the Vatican, the footage had an impact. High-ranking officials took notice, and many were moved by the simplicity of what they had seen. Pope Francis himself, known for his own emphasis on humility and service, reportedly appreciated Tagle's actions, reinforcing his trust in him as one of the Church's key figures. But for Tagle, this wasn't about gaining approval or admiration. When asked about the video later, his response was as humble as ever. With a smile, he simply said, "I was just doing what needed to be done." No grand explanations, no desire to turn the moment into a lesson. Just a simple truth. He saw something that needed to be done, so he did it. And that, perhaps, is what makes Luis Antonio Tagle such an extraordinary leader. Because in a world where many seek power for its privileges, he remains a servant. In a time when leaders are often distant, he remains close to the people. And in a world where kindness is sometimes seen as weakness, he proves that true strength lies in humility. This was not just a moment caught on camera. It was a message, a reminder to all of us that greatness isn't found in titles or positions, but in the simple, unseen acts of goodness we choose to do every day. And for Luis Antonio Tagle, it was just another day of living his faith, whether the cameras were rolling or not. As the video continued to make rounds across the internet, it began sparking conversations far beyond the Catholic community. Journalists, bloggers, and even leadership experts began analyzing what made this moment so impactful. Was it because Tagle was a well-known religious leader? Or was it something deeper, something about the sheer sincerity of his actions that struck a chord with people from all walks of life? Many pointed out that true leadership is often tested in moments when no one is watching. While speeches and public gestures can be carefully curated, the way a person behaves in their unguarded moments reveals their true character. And in this instance, Tagle's character shone brighter than ever. Even outside of religious circles, many saw this as an example of the kind of humility the world desperately needs today. Social media platforms were filled with messages from people who found themselves reflecting on their own lives. How do I act when no one is watching? Some asked. Am I doing good only when I expect recognition, or is kindness part of who I am? This moment also reinforced something Pope Francis had long been advocating for within the Church, a return to simplicity, humility, and service. Over the years, the Pope had been pushing for leaders in the Church to be more accessible, more engaged with everyday people, and less caught up in the trappings of power. In many ways, Tagle embodied this vision perfectly. Those who had worked closely with Tagle weren't surprised by the video. In fact, many shared their own personal encounters with him that echoed the same theme of humility and kindness. One Vatican staff member recalled an incident that took place behind closed doors. After a long meeting, the participants had left their papers and notebooks scattered across the table, assuming the staff would clean up after them. But before anyone could start, Tagle quietly began gathering the materials himself. "This is our space," he had said with a warm smile. "We should leave it as we found it." Another story came from a young Filipino student who had once met Tagle at an event. Nervous about approaching such a high-ranking church official, the student hesitated before finally working up the courage to introduce himself. To his surprise, Tagle didn't just shake his hand. He sat down next to him, asked about his studies, and spoke with genuine interest for nearly half an hour. For many, this viral moment was more than just a heartwarming story. It was an important reminder of the values that should define true leadership, whether in religion, politics, business, or everyday life. The impact on the Filipino community. As the video spread, it had a particularly strong effect on Filipinos around the world. Tagle, often referred to as the Smiling Cardinal, has always been a beloved figure in the Philippines. His warmth, relatability, and deep connection to the Filipino people made this moment feel even more personal to those who call him their own. For many Filipinos, seeing one of their most respected religious leaders display such humility was a source of pride. It reminded them of the core values deeply embedded in Filipino culture: bayanihan, malasakit, and respeto. Churchgoers in Manila shared their thoughts on social media, saying that this was exactly the kind of example that needed to be set for the younger generation. "It's easy to talk about kindness," one commenter wrote, "but actually living it, even when no one is watching, is something else entirely." In Filipino communities abroad, especially among overseas workers, Tagle's actions were seen as a reminder that no act of service is ever too small. Many OFWs who work as caregivers, cleaners, and service workers felt an emotional connection to this moment, as they too often perform tasks that go unnoticed but are essential. "This is why we love Cardinal Tagle," one Filipino nurse in the U.S. commented. "He reminds us that no matter where we are or what we do, dignity comes from how we treat others." Lessons from a viral moment. But beyond the Catholic faith and beyond the Filipino community, there was a universal lesson to be learned from this unexpected moment. In a world obsessed with status, power, and recognition, it's easy to believe that greatness comes from being seen, being admired, or being celebrated. But Tagle's actions challenged that notion. They reminded us that true greatness is often found in the quietest moments, when no one is watching, when there's no applause, and when we choose to do good simply because it's the right thing to do. Leadership expert Simon Sinek once said, "The true price of leadership is the willingness to place the needs of others above your own." What Tagle demonstrated was exactly that, a willingness to serve not because he had to, but because it was in his nature. What this means moving forward. As discussions around the video continued, many began to wonder, what if more leaders, whether in religion, politics, or business, embraced this kind of humility? What if more people chose service over self-interest, even in the smallest ways? Imagine a world where those in power didn't see themselves as above others, but instead as caretakers of the people they serve. Imagine if acts of kindness, no matter how small, were valued just as much as grand gestures. While the video of Luis Antonio Tagle eventually faded from the news cycle, its message remained powerful. It wasn't just about a cardinal picking up trash, it was about a way of life, a reminder of what true service looks like, and a call to each of us to reflect on our own actions. Because in the end, the moments that define us aren't always the ones that make headlines. Sometimes they're the ones that happen in silence, in humility, and in the presence of no one but ourselves. And for Luis Antonio Tagle, that moment was simply another day of living the values he has always believed in.